the second part of this event and the second panel. In this session, we will continue to discuss the same topic, but we will discuss national and institutional examples of how to approach possible tensions and possibilities between the broader policy objectives of sustainability, inclusion, and digitalization, and what they raise for student mobility. So we have 4 panelists with us today who are kindly agreed to share their point of view on the topic. 2 of them are representing the higher education institutions or university networks, and 2 representatives from national funding agencies. I will quickly introduce you to the panelists before I give them the floor. So first, participating from Helsinki, we have Sofia Lähdeniemi, who works currently as head of unit for the unit of International Higher Education Corporation at EDUFI, which is the Finnish National Agency for Education. Then we have Luca Erdei, who participates from Budapest, where she is an assistant lecturer at the Institute of Research of Adult Education Knowledge Management at the Eötvös Loránd Universities, the ELTE. And she's also co-lead as a mobility expert within the CHARM European University Alliance. In the room, we have first Frederik, who is currently the head of International Relations Office at the Ghent University. And then finally, we have Hörig from the DAAD, where he is the head of Division Strategic Planning and supervises the work of 5 sections at the DAAD headquarters in Bonn, Germany. And he will also, from 1st of January, take over as the director of the DAAD Brussels office. Each of the 4 panelists will now give an input from their perspective, and after the 4 introductions, we will open for questions from the audience. For our online audience, please, as in the previous panel, you can write your questions in the comments section, and you can do that throughout the presentations. So now we continue with our presentations, and the first presenter is Sofia, representing then the Finnish National Agency, EDUFI. Please, Sofia, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the kind invitation to this panel to discuss these interesting and highly important topical priorities of inclusiveness, sustainability, and digitalization, and how all of this will reshape not only student mobility, but the way higher education institutions and different actors in the field will need to take them into account in their activities and way to operate. So the first slide, please. And in addition to the joint European strategies for higher education, each country, of course, has their own strategies and policies to follow and implement. And I will start off by presenting some of the relevant and topical ones in Finland that collide with the mentioned policy priorities. The Joint Division 2030 of Finnish higher education institutions aims to build a learning ecosystem that offers diversity and flexibility for various life situations and needs, for example, but it doesn't touch the topic of internationalization per se. The accessibility plan promotes participation and diversity in higher education, but doesn't say too much about accessibility for international possibilities for students. Where the policies to promote internationalization in Finnish higher education set a clear message that Finnish higher education community should aim to be an international welcoming community, and internationalization of students is part of it. And even though all of these national policies do not specifically address the policy priorities that we are talking today from the point of view of internationalization, they still support them. For example, national funding or national target levels may power the policies and bring them into action. The national policies, similarly to the European ones, also have a role in raising awareness on important issues. And for example, the accessibility plan raises awareness on a wide spectrum of situations that create difficulties for accessing higher education in the first place. And understanding this makes it easier also to understand, for example, that when you are in a situation where entering higher education is difficult, a period abroad in a foreign university is something that may not even cross one's mind. Next slide, please. And as the international aspect of inclusiveness, sustainability, and digitalization are not addressed comprehensively in the national strategies of Finland, it is quite valuable that they are addressed in the European policies, pointing also a clear place, for example, for national agencies and higher education institutions to take action in promoting and acting towards these important priorities. And next, I will give a few examples how EDUFI has operated towards these priorities. Since 2020 already, EDUFI has jointly identified 4 impact objectives that guide all of its operations. And these are equality in education and internationalization increases, global-minded thinking increases, the well-being of learners improves, and continuous learning raises the level of competence. And these impact objectives are realized via numerous concrete impact acts through which we are, for example, supporting virtual international cooperation within higher education. And in Finland, all the state organizations have been required to choose 5 Agenda 2030 aims and modify organization-specific activities to support them. In an organizational level, impact objectives, Agenda 2030, and Erasmus Plus priorities are taking us towards the same goals, and this, one could say, brings impact to actions and also deepens our understanding on the complexity of these priorities in a very valuable way. But in addition, cross-sectoral working groups for the priorities are taking place, and also sector-specific actions, of course, are planned together with the Finnish higher education institutions. And in national programs, for example, in a newly formed Team Finland Knowledge Funding Instrument, the needs of Finnish higher education institutions were taken into account, and the program was designed to be as flexible as possible, allowing short mobilities, intensive courses, long mobilities, but also supporting virtual learning and virtual cooperation within projects. And the former LLP program already was an inspiration for EDUFI in starting to provide accessibility grants in all of its national funding programs for internationalization. And via Erasmus Plus, students with children have been identified as a group with fewer opportunities and in need of extra financial support already during the last Erasmus Plus program period. But important thing that we try to bear in mind is that when talking about these priorities and putting them into action, for example, inclusion, it is important that we remember that it is not only and always financial support that is needed, and other support mechanisms are needed too, such as guidance. And years back, we have made check-up lists for students and receiving and sending institutions on how to plan and support successful exchange periods for students with special needs. And with the program, with the new program, Erasmus Plus program, and broader understanding of inclusiveness, we might need to renew now our guidance concepts, together with the stakeholders, of course. And when it comes to sustainability, awareness raising plays a crucial role, especially, and therefore an important part of the sustainability strategy for the Erasmus Plus in the NA will be communication activities and peer-to-peer learning in networks. And then to the final slide. So we need face-to-face live meetings in international cooperation. We all probably know this. COVID has proved that running international projects is possible virtually, but live meetings and interactions are needed too. especially in solving tricky situations and gaining mutual understanding. And the fact, I suppose, is that we do not yet have the knowledge or technology that can bring the same skills, competencies, and growth virtually that physical mobilities do for students. And therefore, and for the sake of Solidarity Europe, physical mobilities for the masses remain really important. And inclusiveness, it's not always sustainable, we know this, and it may require tailor-made solutions at an individual level. Sustainability, on the other hand, requires changing the way masses act and make informed choices for their mobilities, where digitalization can be seen as a tool to deepen international skills and networks, bringing the international higher education community for the reach of all and to the everyday operations and learning within higher education. So is it then possible to find comprehensive approaches for advancing these priorities? Perhaps not, but approaches that lead all together step by step to a more inclusive, more sustainable and more international higher education, definitely yes. With one of the connecting aspects being that awareness raising is an important tool for advancing the priorities. And to conclude, comprehensivity also comes from connecting European level, national and institutional policies and finding synergies in implementing them in a meaningful and purposeful way. This would be it for my 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Sofia, for this very comprehensive and quite, I think, optimistic presentation, if I may say. I think it's very interesting to see how you, on national level, also adapt your program offer according to the policy priorities we are discussing, that you're already doing that. And I think also your message of national measures and policies being complementary to the European level measures is quite important and something to take on in the further work we're doing. I will now move to Frederik from Ghent University to please present his point of view, representing then the university's perspective. Please, Frederik.
Thank you very much, and also a big thank you to Akka for giving me the opportunity to be here today with you and have been invited to present on this very interesting topic that has been very close to my heart for many years already. And that's finding this balance between internationalization on one hand and a number of other priorities of other agendas on the other hand. And I've been working on this for quite a while, and even though it's still challenging, it brought us to this vision that we have developed at Ghent University, that we have to look at internationalization from this holistic and ethical perspective, that we have to take on board also all these other agendas to make sure that they are in balance and that they are indeed as comprehensive as possible. Let me start by saying that for us, internationalization experiences, that's broader than mobility, I must say, is first of all creating opportunities for all students. So it's not about 25, 50 or whatever percent. We want to offer all our students opportunities to become international intercultural competent by offering them a variety of internationalization experiences. And how we do that, I will touch upon that later during my talk. So the reason why we have this vision is that for us, mobility is certainly not an aim in itself. It's really just a means, one of the means that we offer to our students for their enhancement of their international intercultural competences in many different ways, as you can see there. We have taken this starting point as the basis for a new policy that has just been approved during the last couple of months in very difficult times to discuss about mobility, I must say. But anyhow, we managed to get approval from both our internationalization and our education council at university for our new mobility policy with some clear targets for student mobility after 2020, so starting this year. Based upon two core principles, and that's first of all, as I already said, said, we look at these internationalization experiences as a broad spectrum with different types that are all treated equally, that need to be accessible for all students, regardless of their backgrounds, and we have been inspired by this by some European projects, of which you can find the information on inclusivemobility.eu website. And also they are all outcomes oriented, as I already said. It's not about the means, the way in which you do it, it's about what students achieve through these internationalization experiences. And I was very glad that during the previous discussion, this point was also touched upon in depth, that for us, quality is key. It's really about making the right agreements with partners. It's about full recognition of what students do while they're abroad. And so we have given a very huge responsibility there to our curriculum committees that take on that responsibility. Because if we want mobility to be sustainable, to be inclusive, then full recognition of what students do abroad is the basic element that we have to take into account. The whole policy has been based on two broad concepts that I will briefly explain. On one hand, windows of opportunity, on the other hand, the stepping stone policy. We define these windows of opportunity which go beyond mobility windows. It's the basic principle, and I know Akka has done a lot of great work on mobility windows. We have taken this concept a bit further and opened it up to all kinds of internationalization experiences to say, well, we want all our programs, and that's part of our policy, to build in such a specific period in their study programs in which there is room offered to students for acquiring these envisaged international intercultural competences, preferably with a choice for students between a wide range of diverse and complementary learning routes to cater for the diversity in students' abilities, means and possibilities. And this brought us to creating and working on this stepping stone principle, and that's also something that we are working on very closely together with our Enlight partners, so the partners in our European University Initiative, and that is to start very soon in the study programs by offering them internationalization at home experiences, and then gradually expose students to other types of internationalization experiences, short-term mobility, short-term blended mobility, blended intensive programs, etc. And then move on to credit mobility and look at towards, let's say, the end of the pathway, more and more degree mobility, such as joint master programs. And so these are the general principles. And let me make it a little bit more concrete by focusing on a few concrete proposals, concrete actions that we have included in our policy plan. One is that we want to include in all learning agreements for students that wish to do so, that they have the right to the provision of reasonable accommodation for students with disabilities, for instance. A second one, and that was also touched upon by the colleague from Finland a few minutes ago, is that indeed we need, in our communication, in our awareness-raising activities, we need to find adapted ways of bringing about this message, and we want to use this stepping stone principle as a kind of image that we can propose to our students to make it concrete that we have this broad diversity of possibilities for them to become international. We have a unique Ghent University scholarship system. I will not go into too much detail for that, but it means that we have a system in which we bring the highest, the scholarship with the highest amounts of money to the students that are in the highest need for it. But we see that still not enough students are aware of that, and that any financial disadvantage should not jeopardize students from going abroad, and we want to promote that a bit more. We have launched a new lifelong learning policy in which we have also included specific measures for these students also to be able to become mobile, and so especially invest there more in short-term mobility. And together with the Sustainability Office, the Green Office of the University, we have developed a new green travel policy for both staff but also for students, which is also about awareness raising, of course. and focusing about and offering concrete information about alternative modes of traveling, about alternative, also comfortable modes of traveling, but also about impact on the spot when they are abroad, how they can diminish that. We of course will make use of the top-up grants of the Erasmus Plus program for green transport, but try to expand that also to students that are not funded through the Erasmus Plus program. And we have also decided, and I'm a bit afraid that that's contradictory to what Philip van der Poele was just announcing, that they will also in ICM focus more on short-term mobility, that we are not going to allow students to get a grant for studies outside of Europe for less than a month, because there is a lot of, let's say, negative feelings about that, and so we will see how we will deal with this new opening in ICM. That might be a point to discuss further on. So that brings me to my final message, and that is stay strong. We have been going through very difficult times with regard to internationalization, international cooperation, but I'm sure that for the future we can continue to build on the experience that we have and continue to offer more and more students interesting internationalization experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederik. I think it's very useful to see these very practical advices that you do propose, and also how your institutional guidelines and strategies on institutional levels are adapting accordingly. So we move then to a second institutional example, if you want, this time from the ELTE in Budapest, and Luca, who is also working, quite involved in the European University Alliance CHARM. So please, Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome all. It is really a great pleasure to be here and representing my university, but also the University Alliance, the CHARM European University Alliance. So as I was introduced, I'm Luca Erdei. I'm a quite junior researcher and also an early career professional in the field of internationalization. So I was really intrigued and fascinated to hear about the experiences of my really experienced colleagues earlier, but I'm also really happy that our concept is quite in line with what they have just said. So first of all, I would like to tell a little bit about the CHARM EU model on the next slide. So what is the CHARM EU model? As you can see in my background, the CHARM European University is a challenge-driven, accessible, research-based and mobile European university. It is one of the first generation of a unique and innovative university model that has been supported by the initiative of the European Commission. I do not want to elaborate a lot on what CHARM EU is, but I think it's really important to tell you that CHARM EU has transdisciplinarity in its core as one of its core values, but you can also see other really important values that really guide our way how we want to build this alliance and all its programs and services and policies around. And if you can see, I hope you can see there that, for example, interculturality and intercultural learning is at the forefront of it. Nevertheless, it's really important to say that sustainability and inclusivity are also there as core values. Therefore, it was quite easy for me to prepare to this presentation today. We are also really dedicated to co-create this CHARM EU model together with our students and provide them with the opportunity to be a strong community across the universities. We are also, it's important to say, we are also having a pilot master's program, and I'm proud to say that we are the first European University Alliance launching a pilot master's program since 2019. So we just started it 7 days ago, and it's a new experience, and I really hope we will have the opportunity to elaborate more on what or how this pilot master's program running. So how the mobility within the CHARM EU model, and especially in this pilot masters, look like. we are really trying to create one international European university for those that are part of the pilot master's program, and of course beyond the program. So it means all staff, academic or non-academic staff, and the students. And we are also having a knowledge creating team with several professionals, extra academic actors from the field. So we are trying to mingle as much as possible with all the facilities what we have. For the students, we have predefined mobility options integrated into the master program's curriculum, and they are really, so one of the underlying principles what we put into this mobility concept was that every single international activity, especially mobility, needs to serve the achievement of the different learning outcomes and the transversal skills that the program wants to enhance. And then the students have the opportunities to make their own choices, to create a unique learning path that really supports them in their way of professionalization. We also define staff mobility, especially teaching mobility, a really important and integral part of this journey. And getting back to the student mobility, we require students to be mobile at least once to one of the partner institutions, what we use dedicated Erasmus Plus funding and top-up grants. So getting to more the question of the today's discussion, how we wanted to marry those different agendas what we had. And on the smart art, on the next slide, you can see that we were, first of all, we were trying to question ourselves how to. What does how to mean? So first of all, we were thinking about mobility, and mobility was one of the core pillars of our proposal, what we submitted to the European Commission. So the question was, okay, how to secure the achievement of the same learning outcomes or transversal skills if the students are not mobile? And we were also thinking how to support all the agendas of sustainability, inclusiveness, and digitalization without losing the cultural immersion experience. We were also trying to figure out how to promote physical mobility if we are aware of the considerable carbon footprint and the inclusivity issues that it may raise. And one of the other how-to question which came to our minds was that how we can include all Charm EU citizens, either people working in the work packages that are running the initiative behind, and those implementing the programs, and of course all the beneficiary groups that are represented in the program. So how we can provide all of them with mobility and these and take into consideration all the respective agendas at the same time. So we have a solution, and I think it's really important that we consider it a solution and not this solution, which is represented on the next slide. And we have some answers. What is working at the moment, and now we are just about to experience how they work in practice. So first of all, marrying the we have to look at the center. The mobility word has been removed from the center, and we understood, and it's really in line with what Frederik just said, that we have to step out from the mobility framework, and we have to understand that we have to think in a comprehensive internationalization agenda that really refers to either internationalization abroad, internationalization at home, or internationalization at a distance. And we have to find the perfect balance how to promote all these for students. Therefore, we prepared a toolkit, which is called Transnational and Intercultural Learning Toolkit, that gives a step-by-step guide for our designers, which helps them to figure out which mobility would serve, or which type of international activity, would help them to achieve the different learning outcomes and how they can develop the transversal skills of students. So it was one of the biggest paradigm change what we had to do first, but then we realized, okay, we have to take it and implement it in other ways as well. So we decided to give different possibilities for the students to choose from the predefined set of mobility options. And for example, blended mobilities cannot be shorter than 5 days. So there are no extremely short mobilities with really requiring travels on one day and traveling back on the next day. And if they go for short-term mobilities, they must use sustainable means of travel, mainly train. And of course, there are some exceptional cases. And then we also promote physical mobility for all CHARM-EU students. This is a norm. Nevertheless, we really try to support it with different fundings. And we have a specific multilateral Erasmus agreement, which provides all CHARM-EU students who got accepted in the program immediately with Erasmus funding. There is also just the question of the amounts what will be given to the different students. Teaching mobility for academic staff and also extra academic actors who are practitioners in the field is really important. So we also think that it's a really good opportunity for them to get to know our students, and instead of moving 100 students during the master's program, we just move 1 or 2 academics or extra academic actors to meet the students in person if it's really important. Also supporting the sustainability and inclusivity agenda, we have top-up grants and we use our own CHARM-EU budget as well. In terms of the sustainability and the digitalization agenda, we established hybrid classrooms, so students are constantly connected to each other, and they have the possibility to meet each other across the 5 institutions, because they are physically located in the 5 institutions, and have a real life and simultaneous discussion with all of them. Therefore, virtual exchange is just really built in the program. Last but not least, because I'm running out of time, Word Cafe events and online social gatherings with transnational and intercultural learning focus is provided and organized by our academic staff, but also the students themselves, so they can meet on a weekly and a monthly basis. And we also have an inclusivity work package next to our inclusivity work package, and actually they are working on the accessible digital environment for all, so that they are purchasing these kind of softwares and everything else what can help the students to be to act efficiently in these environments. So as a concluding word, we have a solution, the CHARM-EU Masters program. Within the CHARM-EU Masters program, we are trying to test it, pilot it in the upcoming 1 year. But as I just mentioned, it raises more questions that we have to work on, and we have a really dedicated team who tries to find more solutions to the upcoming questions. So thank you very much for the possibility to join you now.
Thank you so much, Luca, for this very interesting presentation, and congratulations on your new master's program. You talked about a lot of I think, very concrete solutions, or very concrete things that you are trying out, and I think it would be highly interesting to follow and to see how this works out over the next year or even more. The final presentation, we will come back to the discussion, and I encourage really everyone who is following this this session online to post their questions in the comment section, and for those of you who are in the room to think out any questions or comments you have. You will have the possibility after the next presentation to post them. So the final presentation comes from Michael, representing DAAD and the German National Agency. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I want to ask the audience a question before we begin, and that is, how easy is it to marry 3 persons at the same time? I don't know. It's hardly done, and I think it's illegal in most countries as well. So maybe the question of marriage between 3 topics is not the right metaphor or the right verb to use. I liked Ulrich's example of pillars and a roof much better, because you have roofs in different shapes and sizes. And I think the pillars, and thus the concepts, inclusion, sustainability, digitalizations, might have variations in length. So in the end, you might end up with a tilted roof that might be quite good to get the drainage of the roof as well. So bottom line is, can we agree that there is variation, that there is maybe a hierarchy, a normative order between the concepts that are on the table? You could say that sustainability and solving the world's challenges is probably the biggest challenge of our time. Climate change, adaptation to climate change would be something we can probably agree on. I think inclusion is coming quite close to that. If we have a very large definition of inclusion, including global justice, for instance, would be. Okay, now the audience disappeared from the screen. And then finally, I think digitalization is mainly a tool, a powerful tool to transform. It's actually the only concept where I think the word transformation is valid to be used in policy contexts, because it can powerfully create new opportunities for the topics we care about. So sustainability and inclusion can be driven and boosted by digitalization. I'll try to give you a small insight on some of the discussions we're having at DAAD at the moment on these three topics. Especially because, like the other speakers, it's work in progress. We're in a living lab, so to say. So all of this is very much very current and very much on in development. First of all, we started developing our sustainability agenda a few years ago now, and trying to disentangling the different concepts that come together with the word sustainability. First of all, we said, okay, there are the sustainable development goals. Let's use them as the overarching principles for discussing sustainability. And then look at the one hand, contribution of our programs towards the SDGs, the topic of sustainability and benefits of our funding activities. So what are the lasting outcomes at the end that's sustainable? Of course, the content topic, knowledge for sustainable development, matters, and nowadays we are very active also with setting up a project on organizational sustainability management, and all of that comes together to the question, how do we reduce on the one hand our footprint, our ecological footprint, and at the same time how can we enlarge our handprint? So what can we do to have more positive effects by changing our portfolio, by deepening the concept of sustainability in it, by actually making our contributions to climate protection measurable? We have programs that fund researchers working on climate change actions. They are mobile, but they do things to the benefit of society, so to say. Can we make that more measurable? Can we make our own carbon footprint measurable in the first place? That's an important discussion. How can we use with climate ambassadors maybe to act as multipliers and to actually say, I'm a senior academic, I don't need to travel that much more anymore. My students need to travel, my postdocs need to travel, but I have my international networks. And so there are variations between the academic community as well on where the necessity of international exchanges are necessary. At the same time, and nobody really wants to touch this issue, but we need to reduce our carbon footprint. CO2 neutral mobility is not possible always, and I think there is a tension between saying increasing mobility and at the same time saying we need to reduce our carbon footprint, and we need to be open about it. This can only be done by having clearer measures on ecological awareness, on ideas for sustainable mobility, maybe introducing climate neutral scholarships, but the tension between, on the one hand, sustainability and on the other hand, what we want to do in terms of increasing mobility is quite obvious, and I like the concept of Frederik's University in Ghent of saying we need a comprehensive internationalization perspective, because it really helps, for instance, by saying through digitalization we use digital exchange as one tool. And I think this is something where I want to focus on this slide with digitalization. It's a powerful tool to do new things. We talk about internationalization at home, for instance, as if it's only lecturers coming to the campus. Nowadays, we have them via Zoom or via Teams and they lecture there. But collaborative work online is a new thing we can do now. And we are doing it and experimenting it, we call it COIL or virtual exchange. It's something that is made possible through digitalization, and it's not replacing mobility in itself. It's just adding an additional layer to what we can do to internationalize the campus. And I think that's a great thing to do. In our digitalization strategy, we try to focus on different aspects of digitalization, both in terms of supporting exchange, in terms of informing, counseling was one of the topics discussed earlier, but also in terms of digitally processing data. And we do believe that diversity, equal opportunities, and sustainability is supported through digitalization. But when we look at the topic of inclusion, the three topics of today become very, very complicated, I think, because if we have a wide definition of inclusion and we say underrepresented groups to mobility, we can look at, for instance, one specific case where we have a dedicated funding program at DAAD for teacher education internationalization, a specific group that was long time neglected and left out of mobility measures. We said we can't do that anymore. So with the Federal Ministry for Education and Research, we developed a new program on teacher education mobility, specifically targeting the group of prospective teachers, providing them opportunities to go abroad. And now we see it's working. Many prospective teachers are being mobile, but they only go abroad for very short periods of time. They can only go abroad for short periods of time. It's already difficult because international experience is not really valued on the job. They could start in school immediately, so there's no benefit if studying longer and going abroad and getting their additional input from something else. Often prospective teachers are also from financially maybe not so strong households. So we really have a problem if we look at this aspect of inclusion in saying because of sustainability, we cannot fund any short-term mobility anymore, because then exactly these type of programs where we say it's okay to go abroad for a semester or a month to teach at a school and do your internship in New York. You can't do that anymore because it's sustainably not the right thing to do. So how do we solve this dilemma? Well, I don't really have an answer to all of it, but I have maybe a suggestion, which is pretty much in line with Frederik's outcomes as well. We could probably agree that the design principle defined by the American architect Sullivan, form follows function, which was very famously brought into reality through the Bauhaus architects and movement, that is really one way to describe what we can do. We need to be aware about the outcomes of what we want to achieve with our measures, with our programs, and we need to then see how do we trade off what we really want to achieve. Sometimes it might be that the trade-off is we want to have underrepresented groups be active in mobility, so it's okay to have short-term mobility, even if it's physical and even if it's enlarging a certain carbon footprint. And at other moments you would say, we want to focus on climate protection, and we do something very specifically targeted towards that outcome. But in the end, the time where we say mobility is good in itself is probably over. We need to be clear, what are we contributing, what are we working on, where do we want to go, and I think this design principle, form follows function, is one way to frame the discussion and to organize the trade-offs that nobody really wants to talk about, because there is no marriage between the three concepts. It's a competition between in various constellations, and we need to be organizing the competition probably and having a way to debate these issues instead of saying it's all possible at the same time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael, for this very interesting reflections, I think, and also thank you for proposing a better picture than the marriage picture, that we rather talk about pillars than a marriage. And I think it's also very, very interesting to hear about your work in progress. I think that's what we all actually in this panel talking about, the work that is in progress. I want to then give the floor to you, to the audience, to pose your questions or your comments. And for those of you present in the room, if you want to take the floor, please come up to the microphone. You can stand over there and I'll see you. First, I do have a concrete question for you, Frederik, from Gabrielle Abermann. If you could perhaps give some concrete examples of how you verify that the outcomes defined have actually been achieved. That's a difficult one.
It's more or less what I refer to as the holy grail of internationalization. Many people are indeed trying to find ways of how to measure these outcomes. I have been asked this question many times before, and I always give more or less the similar answer, and this: international and intercultural learning outcomes are also learning outcomes, like all the other learning outcomes. That means that we need to describe them in the same way as we describe other learning outcomes. That means that we need to make them operational in the field of study to which they apply in the same way as we do that for other more generic learning outcomes. And if you do that, then of course you also need to adapt the ways in which you organize your measurement or the assessment of the achievement of these learning outcomes in a similar way as you do with other learning outcomes. And that's exactly what we promote internally in the university, in the guide that we have developed for our programs and also in the specific training program for our study programs. This is one of the crucial elements that we bring about. And then we give some concrete tips, like use a combination of direct and indirect assessment, use also kinds of self-assessment tools that have been approved for the assessment of intercultural achievement, for instance. So there are ways to deal with that. One specific element that I want to add, because we're discussing here about how to marry or merge these different agendas, is that there are definitely possibilities to look for synergies between, on one hand, sustainability learning outcomes and international and intercultural learning outcomes. And so that's also something in which you can, within study programs, focus on these agendas at the same time, and which could also be very beneficial also for the assessment of it.
Thank you so much, Frederik. I want to also pose the same question to you, Luca, about you, how you will work on verification of outcomes in your new project.
Thank you very much for the question. So as I already mentioned, we have dedicated work packages that are dealing with different really important agendas and also practical matters. And for example, we have a work package called Teaching and Learning, and they are really dedicated to make a really innovative teaching and learning framework with all assessment criteria taken into account. So actually, it's a really interesting co-work between these two work packages, that there is a subgroup, like approximately 10 really talented colleagues across our 5 institutions, that has been working on an assessment agenda and an assessment framework, and also rubrics for assessment. And actually, we were trying to provide input on the learning outcomes of the international experiences. And therefore, we try to put into these assessment rubrics our the intercultural, transnational and intercultural learning outcomes. So what we provided them was also a list of competencies we saw really important and central that can be developed through international experiences. And we didn't come up with these examples just in an ad hoc way, but what is a really important working method for the Charm European University Alliances that try to reach out to different networks and different projects and try to pull in the knowledge that already exists outside. So for example, there is a Key-ETU project, an Erasmus Key-ETU project called How Long is Too Long? And within this project, some of our colleagues, also including myself, we prepared a huge literature review on what competencies can be developed. And we defined 4 competence areas like intercultural competencies, language competencies, social and personal competencies, and professional competencies that can be heavily developed through international programs, either at home or in other ways, also through mobility. So we put these input and try to show try to incorporate in the assessment rubrics.
Thank you so much, Luca. There were also a couple of questions regarding inclusiveness and inclusion in the chat. One from Reka Totsa from the Asia Europe Foundation saying, well, could you share some examples on the core value proposition, why institutions should enhance inclusion in their international activities? How would you convince leaders, managers, and colleagues in higher education to make an effort? Why should they care? I don't know, maybe I can challenge Sofia to start to reply to that one. What do you think?
That is really an interesting question, a good question. For us, it's easy if there are national policies that the higher education institutions they need to apply to, they need to follow. And I must say that for now we haven't really had the need to think this thoroughly in our agency, as every Finnish higher education institution is required to think of inclusion, accessibility issues and make their own plan. And this is directly connected also for the steering system and the national funding for higher education. So this is of course an easy solution, kind of an easy way to explain it, that so far we didn't really need to think of the motivation and how to address this discussion. So far, I think the climate when it comes to inclusiveness in higher education, it's quite positive. So there hasn't been this need to really take part actively in this discussion. So I would very much like to hear about other colleagues, if there has been a need really to state and point out and why inclusiveness is important and what are the means to make raise awareness on its importance within higher education. Thank you.
Fia, I don't know, Michael, if you have some points from the German point of view there?
Well, maybe not from a German point of view, but also especially from the point of view of the discussion we're having in DAAD at the moment. For those of you that have been familiar with our organization for longer, have maybe witnessed that in the way we describe our own strategy, we have had a fundamental shift from a topic that we called scholarships for the best to realizing the potential of those that we support. And I think this is one of the ways that we signal that the way that we frame the whole topic of internationalization is changing also from our perspective, because the value of diversity is at the center. Diverse teams, diverse groups create different types of outcome. And I think this debate has been underlying some of our activities, but it's now coming more to the forefront. And if we again look at the sustainability agenda, then of course social sustainability is part of that. And inclusion is part of that agenda, and we should definitely tackle these issues and be having a holistic perspective on sustainability, which includes issues on diversities. And as I said, global justice, it's part of that wider discussion.
Thank you so much, Michael. We actually have a question from the room. Please say your name and where you come from. Thank you.
My name is Janine Gregersen-Hermans from Zuid University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And I'm really happy that in this panel, actually, we talk about what all matters, and that is the curriculum, where inclusion, sustainability, and the digital agendas really come together. But my question is about, because to make that a success, I think we need all stakeholders aboard. And the key stakeholders here for me, not only the students, but it's also the lecturers who teach in these programs. And Frederik, you talked about training for staff, but is there also a view on what are the specific competences, the additional competences lecturers in any field might need to make this a success? Because it's not an easy job to do this.
Thank you so much. Frederik, do you want to start?
I'm very glad that over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years, we have been increasing our cooperation with colleagues within the university, from the Quality Assurance Office, from the Teacher Development Office, because we think that we should not only look at it from this internationalization, teaching in the international classroom, working around these international intercultural learning outcomes, but from a broader perspective. So we include this in a kind of philosophy, you could call it, in which we have developed similar train-the-trainer activities for how to enhance sustainability, diversity, entrepreneurship, internationalization, and language competences in the classroom. So colleagues from working on these topics have jointly developed an approach to this, which is, as I said, a train-the-trainer approach, in which we work together with programs and tell them not only this is how you can work on internationalization, this is how you can work on sustainability, but look at it from a comprehensive point of view. Bring these together, not only topic-wise, because that might sometimes be challenging, but also mainly from a policy and an implementation point of view. And we have just started half a year ago with the first train-the-trainer courses, so I cannot tell a lot as yet about the results of that. But I can certainly say that there's quite a lot of enthusiasm from programs that volunteered to take part in the first stage of the implementation of that approach. So this is, I think, my biggest advice there is: do not do this from the international office. Do it to leave it to the people that are professional in that, and do it together with them.
Thank you so much, Frederik. Does anyone else in the panel want to comment on this question? No? Then I think actually we arrived at the time where we should wrap up the discussion. I think we haven't finished the discussion, but that's another point. I'm sure there will be other occasion. First of all, I want to sincerely thank the panel, Frederik, Luca, Michael, and Sofia, for their input, where they highlighted both the conflicting interests between equally worthy policy priorities, I must say, but also concrete examples of how we can deal with these different priorities, sometimes contradicting, sometimes inattention between them, etc. And that they are being dealt by today on the level of universities, of the level of university networks, in national programs and schemes, and I would also think in institutes and on every level in the student bodies, etc. I also want to thank everyone who participated in the discussions, both online and on site. I'm sorry we didn't have the time to go through all the questions.